Well, good morning everyone and welcome to this Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 Office and Landonline Changes webinar. I'm Dwayne Wilkins. I'm a Senior Advisor Geospatial Capability Building at Toitū Te Whenua, and I'll be facilitating today, just helping out with the technology and things. We're joined by Mark Gooden, who is a cadastral surveyor in the property rights team, and he's been supporting the implementation of the rules in Landonline. And our main presenter today is Lyndon Telfer, who is the Assistant Surveyor General, and he has been the technical lead for the development of the cadastral rules in 2021. Hand over to you, Lyndon.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Dwayne. I'm seeing the messages flowing in there, so everyone's obviously up and running. We've got a good number of people. We've got over 318 people online at the moment. So look, welcome everyone to this webinar focusing on the Office and Landonline changes required by the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021. It's the second round of webinars following the introduction to the rules back in May. So I'm going to set some expectations about what we're going to cover here today. I'm going to go through the transition arrangements. Some of you will already be familiar with those if you attended my conference presentation a couple of weeks ago in Auckland, but for those of you that didn't, I want to make sure you're very familiar with how they're going to work. I'm going to cover off how you create a CSD and how you convert a CSD from the RCS 2010 to the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 using Landonline. I'm going to cover off some of the key capture changes you're going to see from Monday if you're using the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021. I'm going to make sure you're familiar with the new requirements for non-primary parcels and easement schedules. We've also got a requirement to include field notes or field information with all CSDs now. We've introduced the requirement or reintroduced the requirement to include area schedules with legalisation CSDs. And also we've got two types of boundary reinstatement CSDs, and I want to make sure you're familiar with how to use and when to use those types of CSDs. And finally, I'll cover off how to get some further information if it's not covered in today's webinar. Now, there will be a couple of slides that you...
Sorry, mate. Just letting you know, we can hear you and see just good. Sorry.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dwayne. Now, there will be a couple of slides from this presentation that's been repeated from the Survey and Spatial Conference a couple of weeks ago, but bear with me as there's also a lot of new content. So the transitional arrangements, and they are quite different than what we've done for previous rules. The go-live date for the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 and supporting Landonline release is Monday, the 30th of August. So from this date, you can capture and certify CSDs and Landonline using the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021. So unlike previous rules, there will be a transition arrangement for surveys commenced under the rules for Cadastral Survey 2010, but not yet lodged. Surveys commenced prior to the 30th of August 2021 may continue to be completed in accordance with the 2010 rules, right through until the 24th of February 2022. After that date, CSDs can only be certified in terms of the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021. During the transition period, CSDs may be certified and lodged in terms of either the 2010 rules or the 2021 rules. Where a CSD is certified in terms of the 2010 rules and it is requisitioned, it may be recertified under the 2010 rules, provided that happens before the end of the transition period. So it's got to happen before the close of business on the 24th of February 2022. All certification after the 25th of February 2022, even following a requisition, will have to be in terms of the new rules. So where a requisition involves a change in capture, you'd need to convert the survey to be in accordance with the 2021 rules. For this reason, it's recommended that you lodge CSDs in terms of the 2010 rules by the end of January 2022 at the absolute latest. This should provide sufficient time for a CSD to be processed and, if necessary, for you to comply with the requisition and return it before the close of Landonline on Thursday, the 24th of February 2022. I'm now going to move on to some of the Landonline changes you'll see next week. You'll hear me frequently refer to the record of survey in today's presentation. Now, the record of survey is virtually the same as the CSD plan under the 2010 rules. Any CSD created in Landonline using the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 will refer to the record of survey. CSDs certified under the 2010 rules will continue to be referred to as a CSD plan. So using those two screen snaps we've got up there on display at the moment, the first one is a screen snap of the survey header, and it says record of survey. That's a survey that's been certified under the 2021 rules. If it was certified under the 2010 rules, it would say CSD plan. And likewise, when you're searching a CSD, I've searched a CSD that's been created in terms of the 2021 rules, and it has a record of survey and a title plan associated with it. Under the 2010 rules, that would show CSD plan and title plan. So when you create a CSD, you'll be given the option for it to be in terms of either the 2021 rules or the 2010 rules. When you import an XML file, Landonline will prompt you whether you want to pre-validate using the RCS 2010. And if you say no, it will default to the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021. If you say yes, it will default to the rules for Cadastral Survey 2010. The version of rules that you select will determine which business rules run and what capture options are available. So, for example, witness marks are not available as a mark purpose if you select the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021. Now, if you already have a 2010 CSD and you want to convert it to the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021, you can do that by changing the radio button on the Prevalidation tab. That's shown there on the second screen snap. But note, when you change versions, some data does need repopulating, and you should never go from the 2010 rules to the 2021 rules and back to the 2010 rules, as some of the original data fields will be lost and need to be repopulated. So make sure it's a really conscious decision that you've made to convert from one version of rules to another before you push this button. Don't just push it and try and see how it's going to work. Until your survey software vendor makes changes to support the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021, some capture edits will be required in Landonline when you import an XML file. Now, the same changes will be required when you convert a CSD from RCS 2010 to the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021. Now, I have been advised by 12D when version 15 is released later this year, it will fully support the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 changes. Now, we've simplified the mark purposes that are available in Landonline when using the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 to make your job easier and more intuitive. We have removed the mark purposes of defined by survey, defined by adoption, and accepted. You now only need to tell us whether a survey mark is a boundary mark, a permanent reference mark, or a boundary mark, a non-boundary mark, or a cadastral survey network mark. But note that even though we've removed the mark purpose of defined by survey from Landonline, there is still a requirement in the rules for certain boundaries and points to be defined by survey. Now, where a cadastral survey network mark is also a permanent reference mark, you must use the permanent reference mark symbology. That's specified in the rules. Now, Landonline will still correctly test whether you've made a connection to a cadastral survey network mark, irrespective of the symbology used. We've added 3 new mark conditions to reflect the requirement of Rule 80, which requires the record of survey to indicate if a boundary is impractical to mark, whether a survey mark is searched for and not found, or whether it's destroyed. Sorry. Where a mark is searched for and not found, it will also be reported in the mark and vector report in the record of survey. Now, I've screen snapped part of the mark and vector report, which shows that iron tube DP3884 is destroyed and peg DP11264 has been searched for and not found. Now, when you import an XML file into Landonline, or you convert a CSD from the 2010 rules to the 2021 rules, Landonline Business Rule Y629 will alert you to invalid mark purposes and conditions. Now, the invalid mark purposes at the top of the screen, labeled BNDS, relate to boundary points that have been set to defined by survey in third-party software. In the Landonline mark capture screen, you'll need to update the purpose from BNDS to boundary. And you can quickly do this for several marks using the multiple selection button. Now, hot tip, all business rules associated with the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 have been given a prefix 600 to distinguish them from existing business rules that begin with a 400 or a 500 series. So, for example, Landonline Business Rule C640 checks for cadastral survey network marks on a Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 CSD. And Landonline Business Rule C440 checks for cadastral survey network marks in an RCS 2010 CSD. Okay, 4 new parcel intents have been added to Landonline that you need to know about. Erosion must now be used instead of hydro to identify parcels of land that have been eroded in terms of Rule 10.2b. Where a portion of an easement is to be surrendered, it must use the Landonline parcel intent easement to be surrendered. Likewise, portions of covenants to be revoked must use the parcel intent covenant to be revoked. Now, these 2 parcel intents will be very infrequently used as they apply only where the underlying parcel is not being created. For example, an easement-only CSD. Reserve Reclassification is to be used where a non-primary parcel defines part of a reserve to be reclassified on a legalisation CSD. Now again, its use is very rare. And if you want further information to see when you should be using reserve reclassification, see our new legalisation guidance. And I'll show you how to get to that guidance at the end of this presentation. From the earlier training, you will recall that the term stratum boundary has been replaced with height limited boundary. So where a parcel is restricted in height, it must be given a height limited prefix. For example, height limited lot 1. Now note, this only applies to lots, areas, and sections. It does not apply to unit parcels or Māori land. To add a height limited prefix to the appellation in Landonline, you'll need to edit the parcel details screen and select the height limited checkbox, which I've got a little red ellipse around. Now, where a survey includes a height limited boundary point, a vertical control mark must be included in the survey, regardless of how close that vertical control mark is to the site. A height limited boundary point on a primary or unit parcel must also include at least 2 permanent reference marks with reduced levels, whereas height limited boundary points for easements, leases, and covenants don't need the 2 permanent reference marks with reduced levels. A vertical control mark only needs to be included, note the word included, in the CSD, but might not need horizontal connections to be captured. So compliance could be achieved by adding an annotation on the title diagram. Levels in terms of whatever vertical datum you're using. The mark name, brass plaque 1, SO 467173, along with the reduced level. We've created a new form of boundary, water centreline boundary. A water centreline boundary must follow the line midway between the landward margins of a stream or riverbed. A previous irregular boundary that followed the centreline of a water body is now considered a water centreline boundary. Previously, water centreline boundaries have been considered as irregular boundaries, and they've been required to be right-lined. So in line with the Greater Christchurch rules that were created in 2017, these boundaries can now be retained as a water centreline boundary. However, a new water centreline boundary is not permitted. Now, water centreline boundaries have been added to Landonline as an irregular line type. So in the line layer capture screen, you must select the correct form of boundary from either water, water centreline, or irregular. Now, when the water centreline boundary is selected, the legal description defaults to boundary follows centreline of stream or river. And the physical description must be set or left as none or blank. An accuracy class is no longer required for these types of boundaries. However, the boundary still needs to be determined to a sufficient level of accuracy once relevant factors are considered. That's things such as the risk of overlap, the nature of the physical feature, and the value of the land. And that's set in Rule 29. So whenever you have selected the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 as the version of rules, the ability to record the class in this Landonline layer capture screen is removed. So when using the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 and a right line boundary intersects with a water boundary, a water centreline boundary, or an irregular boundary, the class of boundary will be different for the bearing and distance. The bearing will have the class A, B, or C as appropriate, and the distance must match the accuracy of the water boundary as determined under Rule 29, and it must be class D. So as Landonline does not provide for the individual capture of bearings and distance classes, these vectors must be captured as class AD, BD, or CD in Landonline. The first letter represents the bearing class, and the second letter the distance class. Landonline will assign appropriate classes to the individual components of the vector when checking the accuracy standards. Now you can see from the screen snap, the vector I've captured, that the class BD has been assigned to this vector. We've added prescriptive requirements for vectors required on the survey diagram. So Landonline Business Rules C620, 621, and 622 will test that the vectors required by Rule 89 are included in the record of survey. Now, the reason we test against the record of survey is that if they aren't included there, they won't appear in the survey diagram. So specifically, you'll need to ensure that when you're in the field, you have a measured vector to each new or old survey mark. Now that's tested by Business Rule C620. There should be nothing new in what you're doing there. You will also need to ensure you have a measured vector to at least 2 other non-boundary marks for each new non-boundary mark. And that'll be tested by Business Rule C621. Now, if you're placing boundary marks, you will need measured vectors between each boundary mark and a permanent reference mark. This can be a direct measurement, I call it a peg and tie, or it can be a series of measurements. Note, the rules require a measured vector irrespective of the type of equipment you're using. Calculated vectors will cause the Landonline business rules to fail. So Rule 78D requires the record of survey to record the type of equipment used for all measured vectors. We've updated the types of equipment available in Landonline, with GNSS replacing GPS and total station replacing theodolite/EDM. One key change we've made to the rules is to allow a non-primary parcel to cross a primary parcel boundary, but not an estate boundary. If there are multiple parcels in the one title, you now only need to create a single easement parcel. That is illustrated by easement BB crossing lots 5 and 6 DP 10470. So this fundamental change should deliver time savings, particularly where creating easements for large infrastructure projects. Where the non-primary parcel crosses a primary parcel, the schedule of easements must show all the appellations of the burden land. The Landonline automatic easement schedule now allows more than one appellation to be added. and it's also the recommended way to record this information. And you can see there in that easement schedule that I've managed to put lots 5 and lot 6 DP 10470, list them as the burdened land. Now the title plan must now also include details of easements to be surrendered and covenants to be revoked. Any easement that is not to be retained, whether it is spatially defined or not, must be identified as surrendered, but not captured. Note, the only covenants that have been previously spatially defined on an approved CSD should be identified as revoked in the CSD. The best way to do this is via the Landonline automatic easement schedule functionality, as it ensures the correct creating document number is pulled through from the underlying title. You do need to make sure you've correctly extinguished the underlying parcel using the parcel capture functionality in order for the correct creating document reference to be pulled through. You'll recall from the previous webinar that field information must be included in a CSD. Now, we're not specifying the format of that information, other than it needs to be in a form that ensures permanent usability. The main criteria is that the information can be readily interpreted by future surveyors who don't have an understanding of the equipment used. To allow future surveyors to accurately plot the position and determine whether there has been any movement of a water boundary, a CSD must also include an accurate record of the position of a water boundary. Again, we don't specify the form or format of this information. 2 new supporting document types: field information and water boundary record have been added to Landonline to support these requirements. When either of these 2 supporting document types are chosen, you can attach a machine-readable color PDF. The machine readability and color is retained after lodgement. It doesn't convert to a black and white TIFF like it currently does. Readability also allows future users to search and copy text to other applications. Now, we have examples of electronic field information in our guidance and encourage you to use the formats developed by Global Survey and Alterra if you're a Leica or a Trimble user. Note that field information is only required where the CSD records a field measurement. For instance, we don't need topographical information relating to the location of a service for which an easement has been created. A title plan, for legalization purposes, must include an area schedule. That's Rule 96. It needs to be in a table, and it needs to include the heading, Schedule of Areas. It needs to include each parcel type and identifier, for instance, Section 1 or Area A. The intended action for all areas, for example, land to be acquired for road, or perhaps road to be stopped. You need to include the current appellation of the land in each parcel. You also need the estate record. And finally, you need the area for each primary or lease parcel. Now, when you attach an area schedule to a legalization CSD, it will automatically bundle and form part of the title plan. If you don't attach an area schedule, Landonline Business Rule C696 will warn you that you haven't included one. Now, just to refresh your memory, there are two types of boundary reinstatement CSDs. Complex boundary reinstatement CSDs are a direct replacement for a boundary marking full CSD, conflict, and must be used where there is significant doubt about the true location of the boundary. For example, if the boundary is subject to conflict, it is an affected boundary, it's insufficiently defined, or it's defined on a diagram on transfer. Where a complex boundary reinstatement survey is undertaken, the requirements are the same as for a full land transfer survey, but without the title plan. In all other scenarios, you can use a simple boundary reinstatement. The simple boundary reinstatement replaces a boundary marking monumentation CSD and a boundary marking reinstatement CSD. There are reduced requirements for a record of survey and a simple boundary reinstatement CSD. The requirements are designed to enable increased efficiency for you in the field and office. Now, if you want to use a simple boundary reinstatement CSD, you won't need to place any reference marks when you're in the field. Only a very simple survey report is required. And I'll cover that off in the next slides. A simplified survey diagram, which we call a reinstatement diagram, and it can even be produced using third-party software. But you will need full capture of all the data. The key capture change you need to be aware of is to ensure that the reinstated boundary vectors use the vector type rein-adopted or rein-calculated, so they display as a thick line type in both plan generation and the Landonline spatial view. And you now also need to assign a class to these vectors so Landonline can correctly test the accuracy standards. This screen snap of the vector capture screen shows the vector type rein-adopted and the class of vector as class A. But you'll also note it's still a form of non-boundary vector. It's on the very right-hand side against layer. The reinstatement diagram only requires a depiction of all old and new marks. It doesn't need to show any adopted marks. A depiction of all measured vectors, but does not need to include bearings and distances. You need to have a depiction of the reinstated boundaries. Now you can see the reinstated boundary there along the southern side of lot 522, DP 11261, is shown as a nice thick line. So it's now nice and easy to see what boundaries have been reinstated on one of these CSDs. You need to include the row names, and you'll also need to include a north point, which isn't shown on that diagram that I've got because it's been screen snapped out. You can prepare the diagram using the existing Landonline plan generation functionality, as I've done. And you'll note there are no bearings and distances, as they're not required. I deliberately hid them, but it would have been quicker to have left them turned on. Now, alternatively, you can add a reinstatement diagram prepared in your survey software, or you could even attach a traditional field note showing the required information. When you do that, these diagrams will be attached as a survey data graphic, so they bundle and form part of the survey diagram. Now, the survey report only needs to include 4 elements: the basis for determining the orientation of bearings, the basis for any bearing adjustments applied. You need to record your definition decisions so future surveyors can understand what you've done, and LINs as well when they validate that CSD. And of course, you'll still need to report on the Landonline pre-validation warnings and conflicts, as required by the standard for lodgement for cadastral survey datasets. We've created a new survey report template in Word specifically for simple boundary reinstatements. The fields to be populated are considerably less than the full version. Now you can still use the Landonline electronic survey report. However, there'll be many fields that are irrelevant. And if you want to get a copy of that survey report template for simple boundary reinstatement CSDs, it's available from Knowledge Base Article 925. And as with any CSD that records field information, all relevant field information must be included. Your first port of call for all support material on the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 is the Rules Implementation webpage. This page includes links to the new guidance. And I highly recommend you take a look at the guidance as it covers topics not previously released by LINS. New topics include unit titles, interim titles, diagram and transfer, application, adverse possession, and legalization CSDs. There's some really fantastic content there. And I'll show you how to get to that very soon. Now, I've only covered the key Landonline changes here today. We've created a comprehensive document to assist you with transition from the Rules for Cadastral Survey 2010 to the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021. This document reiterates the field changes we covered in the first webinar and expands on the office changes. It also sets out each task you need to undertake when converting a 2010 CSD to the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021. We've also spent a lot of time updating the Landonline Prevalidation report explanation, so all the new Landonline business rules are now covered and explained. We've updated the survey report template for those of you who prefer a new Word version, who prefer the Word version. This is another survey report template to be used if you're doing a full survey. This is a different report template I'm referring to than the ones for simple boundary reinstatement CSDs. We've put a significant amount of time and resources into the development of this material and are confident you will find it useful. If you can't find the information relating to the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 in the support material, we encourage you to contact us using the email address sgrulesreview@lins.govt.nz. Now that concludes the technical part of my presentation. I would like to spend a couple of minutes, providing there's not too many questions, showing you how to access that information from our website. Have we got time for that, Dwayne?
Yep, we're all good. Lyndon, we've got a few questions there, but very similar to our previous session. So yep. I think we're all good. Yep, can see the screen good.
Great. Now, to access our rules implementation webpage to get all information relating to the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021, simply go to the LINS homepage and in the search engine, type in CSR 2021. Hit enter, and the top search result will be the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 implementation page. Just want to quickly take you to that and talk through briefly some of the information that's available on this page. We've got a contents here showing you what's available. There's a link to the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 on the legislation website. There's information to do with these webinars, and this is also where a recording of the webinar for the previous training back in May is held, and also where a recording of this webinar will be held. Hopefully it will be available late next week. We've got some further information on the transitional arrangements, and I talked about a transition document. I'll quickly click on that and show you. It's a very comprehensive document. I highly recommend you save a copy of this to your local hard drive, and you refer to it when you're working on the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 initially. Hopefully it will fill in any gaps and assist you with preparing your CSDs and undertaking field work. It's 25 pages. I won't go through each page, but you can see what it looks like there. There's a section on Landonline. As of early next week, there'll be release notes to support the version of Landonline that's released over the weekend, and any further information that's relevant to using Landonline will be linked to from that section there. There's a section on our new Cadastral Survey guidelines. The existing guidelines that we've got to support the 2010 rules will continue to exist for some time yet, and the guidance for the 2010 rules is identified by a yellow banner, and any new guidance relating to the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021 is covered by a blue banner. Now, all the new guidance that were released so far, and we're still adding to this, and there'll be more released before Monday, it contains a very large index. And we're going to try this index out. It has the main topic at the top, boundaries, and then all the subheadings. And there's some other topics, quality of boundary definition. And I won't go through each one of them, but the beauty of an index is it allows you to do a keyword search. For instance, you can go Control F, and if we want to find some information on limited titles, I shall go limited title. I can see there's 3 occurrences of limited title, and I'll go quick. No, I don't want that one. I don't want that one. But yes, I do want this one. And that'll take me directly to the guidance on limited titles. And you can see it's identified by a blue banner there. So there's a couple of other pieces of information that are relevant and helpful for you. There's some information on the lodgement standard. The lodgement standard will be updated to reflect changes to the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021. However, that will take place probably after the end of the transition period next year, so after the 25th of February. In the interim, any references to the rules for Cadastral Survey 2010 and that lodgement standard should also be read as a reference to the Cadastral Survey Rules 2021. And finally, on that page, there's some information for lawyers. There's a fact sheet there that we sent out to all lawyers via LandWrap. It's just alerting them to the fact that the rules are implemented from the 30th of August this year. And they will see some subtle changes in some of the CSDs. For instance, a non-primary parcel may cross more than one primary parcel boundary now. There's new height-limited appellations, and the requirement also to make them aware of the requirement to identify easements to be surrendered and covenants to be revoked. So hopefully having that information, the title plan, will get surveyors and solicitors talking up front rather than finding out afterwards a particular easement can't be surrendered. So that pretty much covers off everything I wanted to show you there. So just to refresh your memory, if you go to the Lynn's homepage and you type in CSR space 2021 and you hit enter, that gets you, the top search result gets you to the rules implementation webpage.
And yeah, that is us for today. Thanks everybody. And we'll see you next time. Have a good week, and here's hoping we'll be able to lock down sooner rather than later. Ka kite. Bye.